current Daf, the seventh Eruvin Daf Ayin Ches. We begin on the bottom line of Ayin Zayin Mabez, where the Gemara continues with another teaching from Rav Nachman and Rabbi Abu, continuing on the theme that we were discussing in the previous Daf regarding if you have a wall that's 10 tefachim high, and that's a separation between two different domains, and you want to minimize it, how to go ahead and do that. Shiz Kos Patzah B'Kazah in Cheskot or anytime Daf Chaim. Bishem is joining us for today's Daf. Mit the grace of Simcha and Yomi. Some ideas we're going to discuss in today's Daf are how to minimize the size of a wall, like we said, separating two chatzeres, so they can join in a single area. Also, another idea, how to widen a ladder, which is not wide enough to be able to connect the two chatzeres, because a ladder could be a Pesach also. Under which circumstances can the two chatzeres be combined? Like you see over here, you have a charitz, we can discuss in the next Mishnah, when you have a ditch that's separating two courtyards, which that itself is a mechitza, because a mechitza doesn't have to be just in height, it could be a depth too. How can you go ahead and combine those two chatzeres? So in the key terms, the concepts are kol davar shum b'shum shvuos, anything that's rabbinically prohibited, legazul bein hashmashos. So by twilight, and Shabbos is starting, they didn't make a gzeira on those rabbinic prohibitions. And Asherah is a tree that was worshipped as a avodah zarah, which is asa b'hana. So begin the current daf. Ayin Zayin on the base, the bottom line, v'amar Rav Nachman and Rabbi Abu, as it contains Ayin Ches Menal. It says, Ziz hayotzeh min hakreisel. There's a ledge that's coming out from a wall. That's daled al daled. It's 4x4 squared tefachim. V'hinich alav sulam kol shehu, and then you place on it a ladder, no matter what size it is, as Rashi explains, even if it's not 4 tefachim wide, and you place the ladder on the ground, and you have the edge of the ladder on touching the ledge. So it's like, this is the chiddush of this halacha, it's considered like one entity, and since the top of it has 4 tefachim wide, and the ladder is touching the ground, so it gives it that height, and it's connected, so as long as the rungs of the ladders are not 3 tefachim away, says the Gemara, miyatai is going to diminish the height of the wall. Now, someone had asked already in the previous shir taste, this guy's at great length from the previous stuff, and we'll see later on, do the ladders have to actually make it to the top or not? But the point is, this is going to minimize, you have a wall that's 10 tefachim high, so that's a mechitza. But if you have already something that's going to be 4 tefachim squared, and it's connected to the ground, then it's going to minimize. Now, it says the Gemara, but this was only said if you place the top of the ladder touching the ledge, as we just explained. But if let's say you put the ladder next to the ledge, and the top of the ladder is actually touching the wall, not the ledge, then arvache, only thing that you're doing then essentially is that you're widening the ledge. And since the ladder is not beneath the ledge, it's just taking you steps to get to the ledge. You don't have a meat over here because the ledge itself is actually very distant from the ground. So it's not going to be considered, so you can't, and like we said in the previous step, in meat be average, you can't minimize something in the ear space, and therefore they're not considered as one entity. That was this halacha. A similar type of idea, says the Gemara, another teaching from Amr of Nachman and Rabbi Abu. It says, Kaisel Tisha Asa. If you have a wall that's 19 tefachim high, so Tzarach Ziz Echad Lahatira. All you need is one ledge to permit that wall with a ladder that's no matter what size the ladder is, and you have a ledge coming out in the middle of the wall. So now at any point you don't have 10 tefachim, not beneath the ledge and not above the ledge, because it's smack there in the middle of that wall. So you're not going to have 10 tefachim of mechitza separating the person from either side of the chatzir. Now, Amr Chizah, he says, what's what Kaisel Esed says? What's if you have a wall that's 20 tefachim high? Then already, but since even though it's 1 tefach higher, then you need to have 2 ledges to permit it. One before the bottom 10 tefachim, and one above from that within the top 10 tefachim. Because if it has a height of 10 tefachim, then it's not going to be sufficient with a ladder, whatever it is. Just like we have the halacha of a wall, where it doesn't help with a ladder just that size. You have to have over here, if you can have the ledge, you're going to have 10 tefachim on either side. You have to have 2 ledges over here to separate this wall of 10, 20 tefachim that you don't have a separation from one mechitza, from one courtyard to another courtyard. Rav Chizdi qualifies now this is specifically if the ledges are not directly opposite each other. So that, like Rashi explains, that you could have a ladder going from one ledge to another ledge. And that's the objective over here, because again, the ledges themselves are not separating. We make a chiddush. Although the ladders themselves are not 4 tefachim wide, but since it gives you access to that ledge, and the ledge itself is a chashav iri, like Rosh Hashanah, a 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim squared, so then it could go ahead and be mamayit the kaisel. Now, if it's 19 tefachim high, so then you put one right in the middle, it's going to separate. You're not going to have 10 tefachim amachitz in any place. But if it's 20 tefachim, then you're going to have to make at least 2 ledges. Now, continuing on a related vein, regarding the minimizing of an area, Rav Huna says that if you have Amid B'Rishus Harabim, if you have a beam in Rishus Harabim, Gavaya Asar B'Rachav Abba, like we said, the height of something makes an Rishus Yachid, and we were talking all up until now a width of 4 tefachim squared, and that's what really we had in the ledges. And the chiddush was they were saying the ladders, even though they're not 4 tefachim wide, they connected. But now let's say imagine a beam in Rishus Harabim that has these dimensions, which makes it into Rishus Yachid. If someone takes from such a beam in Rishus Yachid, or he puts stuff on top of it, he's going to be chayv. Now let's say v'na'atz boy. Now he's stuck on the top of that beam. A yesed koshu, a small peg. So then the halacha is miyatoy. That's going to minimize the width of this beam from being 4 tefachim wide, and you now nullified it from being as a Rishus Yachid because it doesn't have that width anymore because you took away from that space. Now we have 3-way machlekes regarding how to qualify this teaching of Rav Huna. Amar Bar Abba says, but it's only ubegavaya. It's only if the peg is high, shleisha 3 tefachim. But if it's not 3 tefachim high, then it's considered like the roof of that beam, and it's not going to minimize the width of that beam. That's one interpretation. Abai v'Ravad Amitabay, they both say, no, Ava Pisha in Gavaya shleisha, even though it's not 3 tefachim high, it's still going to be considered as a makom ketur. My time, what's the reason? Because people are not going to use it. So even though it's 2 tefachim high, 1 tefach high, it's still that takes away from the utility of the top of the beam, and therefore it's going to minimize its width. It's not going to be considered as Rosh Hashanah. The Ashiyama, he actually says the opposite of the first interpretation. I feel like even if it's 3 tefachim high, it's still going to be considered as a Rosh Hashanah. My time, what's the reason? Well, doesn't it take away from the it's 3 tefachim high? It's so he says because Esha the Tali Bein Nidi. Because you could hang something from that peg, and since it has utility on the beam, it's considered as part of the beam, and it's not going to minimize from the beam. Now, on that asked the Gemara, Amali Rav Acha Bered Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi, who just said this opinion, he asked him, what's if Malik Kulabi you say this now? What's a loch if you fill up the whole top of the beam with pegs? As Rashi explains the Gemara's question. According to you, that you said that when there's 1 peg, okay, it's still considered as utility. It's not going to minimize the width of the beam because you could hang something from a peg. But what's if you put on many pegs? What are you going to say? Then for sure you can't use the width. So if it's not going to be width or not. So Amalei said to him, didn't you hear the teaching of Rabbi Yomi? Rabbi Yomi said the following halacha. He said, Bar v'chulyasa. Bar is a pit which takes you into the depth of the ground. And chulyasa is the ground that was taken from the digging of the pit, and they used it to surround the opening of the pit on the top, in the height of above the ground. Rabbi Yochanan said those 2 things are mitzaref. They combine to complete the measurement of le'asara, of 10 tefachim, for the depth of the pit, to make the pit as Rosh Hashanah. So too, when you take as Rashi explains, is what the Gemara is comparing. When you take the cavity of the pit, and you put it surrounding the area around the chulya, that they combine to complete not only the height of 10 tefachim, but also to complete the 4 tefachim of width. Because for something to be considered Rosh Hashanah, not only has to be 10 tefachim wide, it also has to be 10 tefachim deep, it also has to be 4 tefachim wide. To make the one who takes something from the top of this chulya into Rosh Hashanah, or put something on top, as the Mishnah teaches in Hazarik on Shabbos Tzadik says Samad Aleph, that the chulya of the bar and the sela, that if it's 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, if you take, you're going to be chai. Now, it's the Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his explanation. That's because the Mishnah over there says chulyas habar v'asela. Why don't you just say the bar and the sela, which are 2 different keys within the Shabbos, the pit and the rock. One's deep and one's higher. Rather, Rabbi Yochanan says over there to tell you that no, the bar and the chulya are going to combine to be 10 tefachim. And Rashi's telling us that what our Gemara is comparing is just like we say with regarding the height, so do we say that they combine also for the width, because that's one of the things. Besides saying the depth has to be 10 tefachim, the width has to be 4 tefachim. Now, so why do you pick Rabbi Yochanan? Rashi says not the Mishnah, because the Mishnah doesn't say explicitly that you could combine. Rabbi Yochanan learns up in the Mishnah why they say bar in the chulya to tell you that they combine, and that's what our Gemara is saying. Rashi is saying not only does it combine for the depth of 10 tvachim, it also combines for the width of 4 tvachim. Now, on that the question is, Vamai, but why is the roof of the chulya? Why is this thing up over here on the top of the pit considered Rosh Hashanah? Haloi mishtamish lei, but this 4 tvachim is not fit to have utility because there's an opening in the middle. You can't use the whole 4 tvachim. How could you say it has a dimension of Rosh Hashanah? There's a hole in the middle. Elamayas, what do you have to say? The manach midi, you'll put something, a board or a rock on the opening of the pit, and then you can utilize it. Chanami here also, the manach midi, you could put something, a board that's 4 tvachim, or spread out some type of a garment or cloth on the pegs, and then you can utilize the area in it very conveniently, and therefore it's still going to be a Rosh Hashanah, even if the whole top is covered with pegs. So that was the opinion of Rashi. Rashi said that he disagreed with all the other interpretations, that even if it's 3 tvachim high, you could still be used to hang things, and he said even if the whole thing has pegs, it's still going to be Rosh Hashanah. You can put a board on top of it, and you can still utilize the area, and therefore it's still going to be considered as a Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara continues, in related vein, what we were discussing before, regarding minimizing a wall. So Amar Rabbi Huda Amar Shmuel says, Kaisla Sarah, regarding a wall that's 10 tvachim high. Again, a wall that's 10 tvachim high is always considered as a mechitz, it's considered Rosh Hashanah, it separates the 2 areas. So tzarach sulam arba asal hatir, and we have many different opinions over here, as you can see in the picture. What is the size of a ladder that's necessary to minimize the wall? You need to have a ladder that's 14 tfachim to minimize. And as Rashi explains, and there's a whole machlekes taisa with Rashi, that you have to go ahead and pull the legs of the ladder 4 tfachim from the wall, because you can't just go straight up on a ladder. It has to lean on something. It has to be a 45-degree angle. So you pull it away, and if it's 14 tefachim high, so great. Now you pull away 4 tefachim, and now you'll have 10 tefachim in height to minimize the wall. Rabbi Yosef Amai disagrees, says no. For the Shleisha Samashri says no. Even if it's 13 tefachim and a little bit more, when you're going to pull the legs away 4 tefachim from the wall, so the top of the ladder is going to be it's going to be even less than a tefach. It's going to be within a tefach from the top. So it's not in a tefach, it's significant, and therefore it's going to be considered as minimizing the wall. Abai Amai says a different interpretation. There's no even if the ladder is 11 tefachim and a little bit, when you distance the leg 4 tefachim, so then the top of the ladder is going to be less than 3 tefachim away from the top. That's always, we know, the halacha called lavin, and therefore it's considered as if it's closed the gap, and if it comes to the top of the ladder. Again, you might be thinking from the previous stuff, and from the top of this amid, even why does it have to go to the top? Why can't it just go halfway to minimize it? That place has a whole discussion regarding, and that was regarding someone that asked regarding do the rungs have to be 4 tefachim this way and what's 4 tefachim that way, and Taisa wants to give those differentiation. It's a large discussion in Taisa's and the Rishonim exactly the parameters, but for be that as it may, for what we're discussing over here, you have to assume that the ladder is going all the way to the top. So that he says, yeah, this is also considered going to the top. He says, he says, even if it's 7 tefachim and a little bit, and the reason for this is because he holds like Rav, that the Gemara is going to quote later on, that you could use a ladder straight up, and it will be considered as minimizing the wall. If you keep the ladder straight up, it's going to be within 3 tefachim from the top, which is loved, and therefore that's going to be enough to minimize that wall. As the Gemara brings, because Amar Rav says, Sulam Zakuf Mamayit, a straight up ladder, it minimizes, you could use it as an entity to minimize the wall, which that's Gemara, which means to say it's a tradition that I heard from my teachers. But said Rav, lay down in my time, I don't know the reason why it is. It's not, you can't use a ladder straight up, you'll fall down the back of your head. You ever see the kids try and say, no, pull it back, you go on the angle. So he says, I don't know the reason why it's going to minimize. Which Shmuel says, there's Abba, which refers honorific to Rav, doesn't know the reason of why a ladder would minimize even when it's straight up. It's the same thing that we have on the previous stuff regarding when you had that one platform on top of the other platform, which was like almost like a little desk on top of like a box, which we said that even though it's exactly one on top of the other, which is not convenient to go on one, if you have, like we had the previous case of ledge on one and then ledge over there, and it's like you can have Mario Brothers and jump from one to the next, so you understand. How could it minimize one on top of the other? And that's the Shmuel, however you like that halacha, the same thing over here, which Taisa actually says Shmuel actually doesn't hold like this. He just comes to explain, as we had, he's one of the other interpretations of that it actually has to be 14 tefachim. He's just explaining, Rav, your own halacha, it's not so difficult. It's like the halacha of itzaba, agabi itzaba, that we also said that it would be mamai. Now, continue on these halachas. Amar Rabba Amar B'chia. It says, the kolim shebebavel, which these palm trees are not really whole palm trees. They were chopped down trunks of the palm trees of Bavel, which the person placed that trunk near a wall to minimize the height of the wall. So it says, they don't need to be made, cemented into the ground. And that is, even though it's something that can be moved, and it has halacha as a kli on it, as a movable item, but in spite of that, it's going to be considered as a minimizer of the wall. My time, what's the reason? Because kaved and kavasa, its weight makes it permanent, because the person doesn't usually take it away. So even though it's not usher to move, but like we had this in the previous daf too, the fact that it's so heavy makes it a permanence, and therefore it minimizes the wall. So too, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says the same idea. He says sulamish of the bubble, the ladders in bubble, which there's different types of ladders, and in tzrichin kava. That does not need a permanence. Michael, what's the reason? Kaved and kavasa, the weight is what makes it permanent. So the Gemara explains. Mandam Sulam is the one that says the ladders are bubble, kosher the column. For sure, the palm trees which are heavier, an item, for sure are going to minimize. But Mandam the one that says the palm trees are bubble, Sulam is loy, but he would hold that the ladders are not considered, since they're lighter than the tree trunks, that actually would not be considered as a minimizer of, they wouldn't be as permanent to consider it as it's as effectively there if you didn't establish it into the ground to minimize the wall, and would not minimize the height. Continuing on these halachas of as it applies to ladders, so Baimin Rav Yisrael and Rabbah. Rav Yisrael asked from Rabbah the following case: if you have a sulam, that's a small little ladder, mikan on one side, meaning when we say it doesn't have a width of 4 tefachim, the sulam mikan, and you have a ladder on one side, meaning right next to it, and you don't have between them of the two ladders, neither one has 2 tefachim to have a total of 4 tefachim of width, which is the dimensions of something that has to go ahead and minimize. And then you went and you made vakashin, you put straw from produce, which like runs, you placed that be'emtza, you placed it in the middle of the 2 ladders to supplement the 2 ladders to be a total of 4 tefachim the width. Ma'u, what would the halacha be? Samalei said to him, in kafir regel. He says, the case you just described, a person's foot, his soul, cannot go on a ladder of straw. As Rashi explained, generally when a person goes up a ladder, he goes up in the middle of the ladder. And this case is not fit for climbing up, so therefore that's not going to be valid. Because again, you had these 2 ladders that they didn't have each one even 2 tefachim, so the 2 of them were not even 4 tefachim. So you put straw in the middle, that's not going to be valid, because guess where the guy's climbing up? His feet are going here, his hands are going over here, his feet are going here. That's not valid. You can't climb up on the ladder of straw. But he says, let's say a different case. Let's say kashin mikan. Let's say you had a ladder and you had straw on either side to supplement the width of the ladder to be a width of 4 tefachim. The sulam be'emtza and the ladder is in the middle. Now what the halacha be? Oh, that only said to him, I rekafa regel. Here, the person's foot could go up on the ladder, and the straw is strong enough just to hold on with your hands and to go up the ladder. Actually, that case would be a valid case of supplementing the width of the ladder to be the width of 4 tefachim, to make it as a valid ladder to minimize the height of the wall. Tintam Beis, another question he asked was, let's say you have a narrow ladder, and chakak lahashlam b'kaisim. Now you carved out to complete the narrowness of the ladder in the wall on either side, opposite the rungs of the ladder, to complete it to have a width of 4 tefachim, like this picture shows. So he asked him, Bekama, how much do you have to complete the width of the ladder in the height of the wall? I mean, we know we have to complete it to be a width of 4 tefachim, but for how high do you have to do that? So Malay said to him, Ba'asar. Up until 10 tefachim is we have to complete that. Once you have a height of 10 tefachim with a width of 4 tefachim, that's already considered as a pesach, as an opening. So although the wall continues going up much higher, we're not bothered by that.
This is only according to Rabbi Shloimy, this shita?
Why you going up?
Well, because the others said you have to distance, you have to have it on an angle.
Oh no, but see, this is in the wall. This is yeah. Is it only according to him? I don't know. It sounds like here that it's like it's carved into it's in the wall. Yeah. Yeah, could be. I was thinking it sounded like that. It was in the wall. Right? Maybe yeah.
The carvings are in the wall.
Right.
Ladder is a ladder.
Right.
But isn't Rabbi
Taisus says
in order to be shorter than 10 tefachim.
no. Taisus is busy. So the Taisus is busy with this case. Right? Remember, Taisus is saying that the wall has to be on the angle, and he says Taisus points out what your question is essentially. He says because he holds that Salam Zukav is Einamamai. Taisus Babaran Zirkasha. Taisus says this man the actually does not hold like him, and he says straight up ladder is not Mamai. So Taisus has a whole discussion. He says it has to be that the wall's on a slant. And that's how you could have the ladder going straight and still minimizing. So here he says only has to go up until 10 tefachim. That Amalei said to him another case. He said, let's say chakukah. Let's say you carved out the whole ladder is all carved out kula b'kaisel, all in the wall like rungs, and the width along the length of the wall is 4 tefachim wide. Here he asked him, okay, but how high does this ladder have to be with the width of 4 tefachim? Amalei says, Malay Kamasa. Here has to go, the whole height of the wall has to be these rungs of 4 tefachim wide. He says, no, what's the difference? How come over here in this case, you only have to have the width of the rungs until the height of 10 tefachim, and here it's got to go the whole wall. So Amalei said to him, Hasam over there, when you have a ladder that goes to the top of the wall, mistalically, it's easy for a person to get to the top. However, it's not halacha going to be considered halachically like an opening if it has less than a width of 4 tefachim or a height of 10 tefachim. So therefore, as long as you make a width of 4 tefachim and a height of 10 tefachim, it's going to be considered, quote, as a pesach, and halachically you just made it valid. But if you don't have the rungs going up to the top, you can't get up because there's no ladder over here. It's an interesting discussion. Unfortunately, I'm very busy. What does that mean? So why not? So why can't you just keep it narrow than 4 tefachim over here? Why does that have to go to the top? This discussion of exactly what does it mean. But the point is, in the simplistic way, that's what he's saying over here. At least you get a ladder going to the top. So as long as you make it a pesach, fine. But here, all you have are these rungs. It's got to go to the top. You can't stop over here at 10 tefachim like you did over here because you're not going to be able to get to the top. Another question. He says, "Asoy le'ilah." What's if you made a tree? You made that into a sulam. You made that into a ladder, which again, one cannot go on the tree on Shabbos. Could that be a minimizer of the wall? So the Gemara explains. This question is valid according to 2 Tanoic opinions. You could ask this question according to Rabbi that we quote him on Daf Lamed Beis and Beis. We said if someone puts his Eruv Tchumen in a tree, so he said he acquires his Eruv. Why does he acquire Eruv? So says the Gemara. Ad Kalakam Rabbi Hasan. Maybe we did Rabbi say over there that it's not a problem halachically that's in the tree because Kaldavashum Mishum Shvus Legazulav, anything that's rabbinically forbidden. Where the reason over there is because you have to acquire a shvisa, that's not a problem. Why not? Hanamili ben Ashlashes. Because that's talking about when do you acquire your Shabbos residence? You acquire it by twilight. And anything that's rabbinically forbidden, like for example, using a tree is only rabbinically forbidden because you might come to break off a branch. So they didn't make it like Zera ben Ashlashes. But the whole day he never said that a tree is not a problem. By the reason why this would be a valid halach over here is because we would say it's considered as a pesach, as an opening, to make the 2 quarters into one by joining them together. But if you can't use this tree the whole day, you can't call this a pesach. So maybe the Eruv is not going to be valid, even though by Ben Hashmashas the tree is not a problem. Yes, by Eruvin Daf he said it's okay, even though you have to be in the same area as your Eruv, but that's by Ben Hashmashas you have to be in the same area. Because that's when the Eruv takes effect of Eruvin Daf. That's going to work by Ben Hashmashas. But here for Eruvin Chatzeros, to make it as one, how's it going to make it as one? It's not accessible on Shabbos, so that can't serve as a drawing. Maybe not for the Rabban. Maybe actually you could even ask the question according to Rabban. Because on the other hand, Pischu, ultimately, it is an opening. Everyone agrees a tree creates access from one quarter to another one. There's only a lion that's waiting to pounce over here. Meaning the rabbinic prohibition says go away, but it is a Pesach, and it makes it as one to use. You won't be able to use the tree on Shabbos, but you're able to use the cracks that's between the walls. So you have to pass from one to the other because ultimately there is a Pesach. You just can't use the Pesach, but there is a Pesach because the tree does connect it as one. Another question he asked him was Asur la'asher. Let's say you took an asherah tree, which is a tree that you worship as avodah zarah, which is forbidden to have benefit from. If you made that into a sulam to a ladder, now would the halacha be? As Rashi explains, it's imtim tzaleim. If you say that a regular tree, which is considered as a pesach, as an opening, but over here that you can have benefit from this asherah tree, what's the halacha? And the Gemara says here too. To Bela Yehuda, to Bela Rabban, you could ask it according to either opinion of a machlekes tanoim. Tiboyla Yehuda could ask this according to Yehuda that the Gemara quoted previously. Yehuda says that if someone could put his Eruv in a kever, in a grave, the Eruv requires, and even though you're not going to have Hana from a grave, so it says the Gemara, you can ask the question according to him too. Ad kind of come Rabbi Dawson, where did Rabbi Yehuda say over there that there's no problem about using Isuri Hana for putting your Eruv over there? That's the Mutta Liknus Bias Bisra, that you're allowed to acquire your Eruv in a place where you now have a benefit from, like a grave. That's Elahasa, that's over there. Why? Because the bus of the Kandla Eruv, after your Eruv acquired to you your Eruv Tchumen, he doesn't care for it to be protected over there. So it comes out that he's not really having benefit from the grave. The only thing he's benefiting is that he's acquiring his Eruv over there. That's not considered benefit, as the Gemara says over there, because the Eruv Tchumen is only for mitzvah purposes, and mitzvah is lav lahanis, and mitzvah is not considered having benefit. And after it's also not having beneficial, because once you had your Eruv take effect by Bnei Shmashah, you don't care if it's protected. But Eruvin says, like we're discussing over here, to make it into a Pesach, that's not for Dvar Mitzvah, and that is considered having benefit. Maybe he would agree, Rabbi Yehuda, that would be forbidden. But Dilma, maybe you could say the opposite. That no, even though it's Asabah, no, but he's not utilizing it at all. Afal Rabbanan Pischahu. Even Rabbanan, it is an opening, the Arya to reveal now. There's just a lion waiting to pounce over here. But still the courtyards are connected through the Asherah tree, because it is creating access. So it's a Pesach. It's just you can't use it. So maybe it is considered connected. So the Gemara actually brings three different opinions regarding these two questions. Amalei said to him, first Rabbah answered this question. He says, Elon mutter, v'asher asura. The tree, a regular tree is mutter because you could use it during the week. So that's considered as a Pesach. Whereas Asher tree is always asur, so therefore that's not considered as a Pesach. So therefore, that's the Elon would be considered as a Pesach according to everyone. Asher would be asur. But Master Rav Chizr says, to the contrary. He says, Elon, a tree, she'issa Shabbos goyim loy. Why can't you use the tree on Shabbos? Because of Shabbos. It's a shvus of Shabbos, because you might have to rip up a bridge. So Nitzah, that should be forbidden. And Asher, to the contrary, she'issa dava goyim loy. Why is that? What's the problem with Asher? It's not a Shabbos problem. It's an other halacha problem about Isur Hanav of a dessert. So Nitzah, that should not be forbidden because that is a Pesach. It's not a Shabbos problem, it's another problem, and therefore that actually should be a Pesach. It's just what we call Ari reveal that. And therefore, Itmanami says, yes, some say, if it's Shabbos that's causing the problem, then us can be forbidden, which is by a regular tree. That cannot be climbed because of Hilchos Shabbos, that's going to be us. But if it can be used for a non-Shabbos reason, like the Isra with the Zav Asherah, then actually Mutter then is going to be permitted. The third opinion the Gemara brings up, he actually teaches differently. He actually says, Elon, the tree, is Plukta Rabbi Yechim Rabban. He actually says, the machlekes that we had asked a question according to either opinion, he actually says it depends on that machlekes. He says that regarding the tree, there's machlekes if you could keep an Eruv in a tree, which is the halacha of Rabbi Rabbanan, and that machlekes is the same machlekes over here regarding if you could go ahead and consider it as a Pesach. And Asherah is also plucked Rabbi Rabbanan. Regarding the Asherah tree is going to depend on the same thing. Can you keep an Eruv on the grave, which is a Surah Hana? That's going to be the same thing over here regarding can you use in the Surah Hana, like an Asherah tree, to go ahead and benefit. So in other words, he says it's actually totally in the machlekes of those the machlekes Tanan that we brought in both of those areas halacha. Now we continue with the halacha, the next Mishnah, continuing the halacha, again, between the separation, which is the theme of this parak of Chaloim, which we said there's a window between the two courtyards. We continue on this theme regarding connecting or disconnecting two different courtyards. Says the Mishnah Charitz, if you have a ditch which is very long and it separates the whole length of the courtyards, and that ditch is Shabein Beis Chatzeres, between two courtyards, and it's Amakur, it's 10 Tvachim deep, it's 4 Tvachim wide, because less than that, as Rashi explained, you'd be able to jump over from one end to the other end, but it's 4 Tvachim wide, which is pretty wide. So then the halacha is Ma'arvin Shnayim, then you can only make two separate Eruvin. Ma'arvin Echad, you cannot join an Eruv together, because again, that's a Mechitza that's separated two of them. And that's Afalim Malay Kash, even if it's filled with straw, a Teven, or a different type of straw, one's the top and one's the bottom part of it, it's not going to be considered as closing it off, because you're not being Mavatal over there, because you can end up taking the straw from there. And because of that, it's not considered as filling it up. It's considered as if it's open. Now, Malay offer, but let's say you filled up the ditch with earth, or pebbles, then actually Ma'arvin Echad, then you can only make one Eruv, the Ma'arvin Shnayim, and you cannot make two different Eruvin because it's all filled up. It's like there's no ditch over here, and then it's considered as one big open chatzir. Now, Nasna Lov Nesem, We're going to explain a lot of these cases in the next daf. Naslav Neser. If you put a board from one end of the ditch to the other end of the ditch, like a bridge, so that's like a Pesach. If you put a board, if it's sharachav abar tvachim, if the board is 4 tvachim wide, and if you have two porches, which essentially gezustra is like a board that's sticking out from the edge of an upper story out into the Rosh Hashanah, like a porch. Now, if you have these two porches that zu keneged zu, and one opposite the other one, both on the second floor of two different apartments, and they put a board that's 4 tefachim wide, like a bridge going from one to the other, that's also a Pesach. And then Ba'arvin Shnayim, they could make their own, like we said in the previous Mishnah, Pesach has the mile of both. A Pesach is opening, you could be together, you could be separate. So Ba'arvin Shnayim, they could make two separate Eruvin, but if they want them, Ba'arvin Echad, they could make one Eruv together because they are considered accessible one to the other, because you have a board, like a bridge, connected to them. Now, Pachas Mikan, but let's say the board is not wide 4 tefachim, then Ba'arvin Shnayim, then it's too narrow, it's not considered as a Pesach. Ma'arvin Shnayim, then you can go ahead and make two separate Eruvin, but the Eima Arvin Echad, you cannot go ahead and make one Eruv together, you're not considered connected to the other one. Now, I'll start the Gemara, most of it we'll discuss in the next daf, and especially this relates to the Mishnah on the next daf too. Says the Gemara like this. The opening halacha was, if you have two different courtyards, and you have a ditch that's qualifying as a bona fide mechitza, because mechitza doesn't have to be only height, could even be in depth. We said if you fill it up with straw, then it's not going to be considered as filled up. And it's not going to help, it's still going to be as separating the two courtyards. Says the Gemara, is it really true that straw doesn't separate? It won't be considered as closing up the hole to say that now we're connected as one? But this is the Mishnah on the next daf that says masbein. And we'll see this more on the next daf, but masbein is a pile of straw. Shebein shtei chatzeres that you have between two different courtyards. If it's gevayah starts tefachim, if it's 10 tefachim high, then it's like a bona fide mechitza. Ma'arvin Shnayim, you can only make two separate Eruvin. Ve'im Ma'arvin Echad, and you cannot make one Eruv together as one. So you see that it is chayetz, it is a chatzitz, it is a separation, it is a closure. So what's the difference from over here? Why, when you make a big pile, it is a wall, and how come over here it's not going to be considered as a closing to stuff up the ground? Says a more important difference. It says like this. Le'inyan mechitza, regarding to be as a partition, so you're right, although you can ultimately take the pile of straw away, as long as it's there, no one's going to disagree, that it is a partition because it separates between the two different courtyards. Just like as Rashi brings within the first paragraph of Tezvav Mabez, they didn't even take the tools you have from your animals, the saddles and all the different things, and you surround yourself with that. Who cares? That's a mechitza. It will be a partition. But regarding to separate by the ear space of the ditch, which essentially that's not just as a chatzitz, that's to consider as if it's closed up. To make it as ground, that only ibatle. If you explicitly are nullifying, you say that I'm not going to take it away from here, then chayitz is going to be considered as a chatzitza. But if you're not going to take it away, it's not going to be as a closure because it's not closing it up. You don't consider like you have a house and you have a bunch of stuff, you're a hoarder, and you have got tons of stuff. We don't consider as if there's no rishus yachid here because it's movable items. So regarding a mechitza, we don't care movable item, it will be mechitza, but chatzitza to consider as it's stuffed up, closed up, that it will not be valid, and therefore that's why it's not a contradiction between what the law of straw is.
What about the nester that he puts from the porch to the other porch? Right. Is it a movable item? Because if it is, it's the same thing.
Well, not really, because here it's a Pesach. It's not, you don't have to be considered as closing up something. If it is an opening, it creates access from one to the other, and therefore it's going to be considered as a Pesach. Somebody was discussing today's Daf in Eruvin Daf Ayin Ches was if you have a ledge that's going out from one wall to that's coming out of the wall, that it has at least one dimension, a 4 by 4 tefachim. But again, you can't be might in the aver. So he said if you put on it a ladder, even if the ladder is however narrow it is, it's going to minimize it because it's connected to the ground, because the rungs are not less than 3 tefachim from each other and from the ground, and therefore creates access to this thing that itself is 4 by 4 tefachim wide. But if it's only on the side of the ladder, if you have the ledge over here and you have the ladder over here on the side of it, then it's only considered widening the ledge, and then it's not going to minimize it because it's not considered as one entity. Only if it's beneath it's considered as one entity. Then we said, let's say the wall is 19 tefachim high, You only need one ledge to permit it. You put it smack in the middle, and you're not going to have 10 tefachim on either part, not above or beneath. But if the wall is 20 tefachim, then you need two ledges. And the Gemara says it has to be zesh like a neged says. So you got a ladder coming up over here, you got a ledge, and then you have a ladder coming up over here, and then you got a ledge. So you can't have that the ledge is right on top of the other, because then you're not going to be able to get from one to the other. You have to be able to have two ledges, and you have to be able to have access to them through the ladder. So it has to be zesh like a neged zeh. Then we said if you have a beam in Rosh Hashanah, so anytime you have a beam, a mailbox, whatever this and that, as long as it's 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim high, it's Rosh Hashanah. So then we said, but what's if, let's say you put a peg there on the top? So we said that's going to be made, and now you don't have a width of 4x4 because it took away from the utility of the top of the beam. But we actually have a 3 machlokes how to qualify that halacha. One opinion said it's only if it's 3 tefachim high. Less than 3 tefachim high, nothing's perfect. It's a little peg sticking out. It's still considered part of it. The other opinion says that no, that even if it's not 3 tefachim high, it's going to take away the status of Rosh Hashanah because ultimately you can't use it. Even if a little peg sticking out, you're going to rip something on it. The other opinion, the third opinion says no, even if it's 3 tefachim high, it's still considered Rosh Hashanah. Why? It's taken away from the utility of the width of the top of the beam. No, because you can hang something from that beam, it still has utility. And then he says even more. He says even if all of it has pegs, it's still going to be considered Rosh Hashanah. Why? He compared it to Rabbi Yechon's halacha bar b'chol yaseh, where we have is the ground, and we have a pit, and we have the earth that you put on the top. He said those two are going to combine not only for a height of 10 tefachim, but also for the width of 4 tefachim. Now the question is, how could it combine? You got a hole over here. You can't use the top. Obviously you'll put a board on the top, and you'll utilize here also. You put a board on top of the pegs, or put some type of a leather thing, and you'll be able to utilize it. Therefore, it's considered still as a Rosh Hashanah. Then we said a wall that's 10 tefachim high, it needs, and we had a 4-way machlokes regarding what it needs to minimize it using a ladder. Either a ladder that's 14 tefachim wide, because you got to pull the legs away 4 tefachim so that it can lean on the wall. Okay, take away 4 tefachim, you still got 10 tefachim, we'll take it to the top. Other opinion says no, even 13 and a little bit, because okay, it's going to be less than a tefach, it's still considered there on the top. Other opinion says no, even 11 and a little bit, because you'll have love it. And that's within 3 tefachim. Other opinion says no, even 7 and a little bit, because he holds you could do the ladder straight up, and you'll have loved. So therefore, it's going to be considered as it's taking you to the top of the wall. And although Rav didn't understand how this works, that it's straight up, but Shmuel said, what I mean, like Itztava Gabe Itztava, where even though it's one right on top of the other, even though it doesn't have utility, it's still considered as connected with the walls of love, and therefore it's going to minimize the height of the wall. Then we said the palm tree and Bavel does not need to, you don't need to cement it in over there because its weight makes it permanent. And then there was a discussion regarding if Sulam is a machlekes, if that's going to be the same thing as the tree trunk to be considered as permanent just from its weight. We said that if you have a ladder on 2 sides of the same wall, it's on the same side, but you have them side by side, but again, they don't have even together a width of 4 tefachim, and you put straw in the middle to combine it to be a width of 4 tefachim, that's not going to be valid because you're going to be walking on the middle, and the middle has the straw, and it's not going to hold your weight. But the opposite actually would be effective because if you have the ladder in the middle and the straw on either side, you're walking on the ladder, and that will hold your weight, and just to hold your hand, that the straw is sufficient. We said you're going to carve out to complete in the wall the width of 4 tefachim. So you have a ladder, but it doesn't have 4 tefachim wide. So you carve out on the sides to make the width of 4 tefachim. So he said only up until 10 tefachim you have to complete it. And the reason for that is because you'll be able to get to the top of the wall, because ultimately you do have a ladder. You just need this to make it into quote unquote a Pesach. That you'll do by making it for just a height of 10 tefachim. But let's say all of it was carved out in the wall, then it actually has to be Malay Kamas, has to go the whole height of the wall. Reason because if you don't go to the top, you won't be able to get to the top. And that's different than those 2 halachas. We said if you make a tree into a ladder, so the question was according to Rabbi who holds that it is Rabbanan, that you were not going to Ben Hashmashes, over here maybe he wouldn't agree that you could make your Eruv you cannot join in Eruvin Chatzeris, like he said for Rebbe Tchumen, by putting on a tree, because here it's got to be the whole day like a Pesach. It's not a Pesach because Ben Hashmashes doesn't help me. I have to be able to go, I have to be considered as if I could have access to the whole Shabbos. Or I could ask, no, even according to Rabbanan, maybe it is a Pesach. It's just like what's called an Ari Revi'al. It's just like a long way to pound. It is an opening, it is accessible, it's just halachically you can't use it, maybe it would be valid. And the second question was, what's if you make a sheira tree into a ladder? So then we said the question could be asked, even according to Yehuda, that says you're allowed to acquire your Eruv Tchumen in the grave. Yeah, that's because you don't care that it should be protected, and therefore mitzvahs lav lahamis nenu. But over here, it's helping you because it's considered something that's you're having access to the other person's chutzah. And we could ask a question called Rabban, like we had in the first question, that no, it is a Pesach, it is accessible, just Arya So the Gemara had three different opinions. Either a tree is permitted because that's in generally, it is an opening, it's just Arya VLL, but a shiur is going to be forbidden because in general, the whole week you can't use it, so therefore we can't consider it as a Pesach. Or we said, no, a tree is forbidden because it's a Shabbos. So for Shabbos purposes, we can't consider it as opening. A shiur is going to be permitted because that's some other Issa. What does it do with Shabbos? Therefore, that would be considered as opening. Or we said, no, the tree is going to be dependent on Machlekes Rebbe and Rabbanan, regarding could you put your Eruvin on the tree still to over here, have the same Machlekes. Regarding a shiur, that's going to be Machlekes Rebbe and Rabbanan, regarding if you could you have, from Yisur Hana, could you make an Eruv? It's going to be totally in that same Machlekes. Then we started the next Mishnah regarding if you have a ditch between two courtyards. We were always talking about a wall, now we're talking about a ditch. If it's 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, so we said that you could only make two separate Eruvin because that ditch is going to separate. And even there's no straw or kash or tevin, and we said that yes, although the next Mishnah says the straw is a mechitza, we're going to chatzitza to make it as if it's filled up. That's not going to be chayitz if you were not mavatal explicit. Mavatal explicit, then you're keeping it over, then it's going to close it up. But if not, we said it's not a contradiction to the next Mishnah. We said if you fill it up with earth or pebbles, then it's closing it up. Then you can make only one eruv together. And if you put a board that's 4 tefachim wide, or if you have two porches, one opposite the other, and you have a board that you make from between the two ones, then you could make either one or two because that's considered as a Pesach, and then you could go ahead and be separate or together. Thank you anytime for hosting us.